If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. True stories only. What's the scariest, creepiest, and most unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? Lots of weird shit. I'm a scientist and all, but duck, the house I grew up in is probably haunted. Weirdest thing? From as early as I could remember, I could see something outside my window. I can still see it as clear as day. It looked like an orange, cartoon Y version of an elk's head. It had a dewlap in the shape of a children's illustration of a crescent moon, which had a face. I always saw it inside view, and both of its eyes were always looking at me. It only appeared at night. This thing terrified me, but I never thought to bring it up with my parents. I don't know why. Finally, when I was about 6, I told them. My grandmother had been reading me a story in my room at night, and the thing had been there the whole time. I noticed she didn't. That's when I realized that this was not normal, and I went to my parents for help. They covered the window with a towel, and I didn't see it again for about a year and a half when curiosity got the better of me. I lifted the towel and saw it again. That's when I decided to never lift that towel again, and it was the last time I saw it. It's been years now, but that room still gives me the heebie-jeebies. I know I didn't make this shit up because I saw it all the ducking time. But now the towel's down, and I still don't see it if I go in there at night. One night, me and my friend were cruising around the back roads. I live out in the country, and we stopped at a little spot to take a piss. Where we parked was on a big cliff overlooking the nice landscape. Off in the distance, you could see the lights of some houses, but they were not close. After taking a leak, I stood on the edge of this cliff and started yelling really loudly to hear my echo. This went on for a few minutes before I finally looked down and noticed that I could see the lights from a window of a house below me. I pointed this out to my friend, and we both kind of laughed that I was being loud this whole time and there was someone living below us. We got back in his car and took off before we got any complaints. Skip to a few weeks later, when we are in the same area during the day. I stopped at the same spot, and I looked down, and there was literally nothing but rocks and bushes down there. There is no way a house could even be built in that kind of area. Spooked us good. When I was 11 years old, I was on vacation with my family in El Salvador, visiting the rest of the family. Where they lived, it was straight up third world. The small town is located in a valley. The mountains surrounding us made the night sky beautiful and dark. It was so far in the country that you never saw any aircraft in the sky. One night I was sleeping and was woken up by a loud, deep rumble. It was so deep, I could feel my chest vibrating. I got up, thinking it was an earthquake. I was in a bunk bed, so I got up to wake my cousin up on the top bunk. He wouldn't wake up. I shook him and turned him in his bed, and nothing happened. At this point, I'm super scared, so I went next door to my aunt's room to wake her up. I shook her and even turned her in her bed, but she didn't respond. The rumbling just kept on. I got back into bed, put the sheets over my head, and just closed my eyes, hoping it would stop. The next thing I know, it's morning. I wake up confused about the night before and ask everyone if they heard the loud rumble last night. No one heard anything. I really believe it was an alien man. Ducking aliens. When I was about 8, my family and I were on our way home from visiting my grandparents. They lived about 3 hours away, and it was late when we headed out. We had been driving for 20 minutes or so, and I was stretched out in the very back seat of the minivan with my head resting on the wheel well, looking up through the window at the stars. Though I never saw it approach, I was suddenly aware of an object overhead keeping pace with our van as we traveled down the rural county highway. It floated above and to the left of us, completely silent. I remember staring at this object, totally transfixed, as it morphed in shape, color, and intensity. One moment it would be a sphere, then shift into a cube, then a pyramid, then a long cylinder, and back to a sphere. It also changed colors as it morphed, every color imaginable, and the colors pulsed in intensity, dim to bright and dim again. The morphing shape, changing color, and intensity pulses seemed to be in some sort of synchronous cycle with each other. I called my brother's attention to it, and we both stared out the window at it for several minutes. We told our parents about the strange object in the sky following us, but they didn't see it and just dismissed us. My brother and I continued to stare at it until the object suddenly vanished, and we were pulling into our driveway. I got assigned a temporary post for the security company I worked for last summer, guarding a railroad storage facility just outside a small town about 20 minutes drive from the city I live in. There was nothing fancy about the place, it was just down a 2-lane road with a small house across from it. I think it only had a couple of metal buildings and a yard full of rail ties surrounded by a barbed wire fence. I worked overnight from 10 to 6, so besides the guy I relieved and the one that came in the mornings, I never really saw anyone else during my shifts. Everything was good for my first few weeks, until I think it was a Saturday night. I'd been on shift for a couple of hours just sitting in my car, trying not to fall asleep, when I noticed a really strong musk-like smell. Looking around from my seat, I didn't see anything until I looked at the tree line across the road from me. There was a huge, shadowy figure standing just outside the shadow of the trees, illuminated by the security light on the power line, just beside the driveway into the rail facility. I was almost paralyzed as I watched this thing walk across the open yard to the side of the house across from me. As it reached the side of the house, I could truly guess its size, as its head reached almost to the roofline of the house. At this point, I still couldn't do anything but stare at it, as it seemed to just stand at the corner of the house. After what seemed like at least 5 minutes of staring at this thing, I snapped out of whatever shock I was in and managed to open my door and climb out of the car to get a better look at whatever it was. It was as I opened the door and stepped out of the car that the thing moved almost like lightning. It turned and ran back towards the woods. By the time I'd managed to get around the front of my car, it was in the woods and gone from my sight, and though I watched the rest of the night, I didn't see any signs of the thing within the trees. I never saw it again while I was at that post, but I still wonder what it could have been. I was 13, and I was hiking with a friend along a creek bed in the woods near my house. The woods were to our left and went upwards in a dramatic incline. There was a trail that led from the top to the creek, and we were just about to ascend and go home as it was dusk and it always got very dark very suddenly in the low-lying patch of land. We got about halfway up, and we saw a shadow blocking the entrance. It was the figure of a person, a tall man. We both startled to a stop and laughed. The guy didn't move. Finally, he spoke, "Can you ladies help me find my dog?" He ran into the woods. We look at each other, and I'm thinking, yeah, why not? We start walking toward him, but we both suddenly start feeling weird about it. He doesn't have a leash with him or anything, and he's still just standing there. I still can't see his features because the sun is behind him. We both stop, and I say something like, "Actually, we have to go home. Sorry." He doesn't move or say anything, and I freak and turn around, bolting back into the woods. My friend follows. I look back, and he's no longer blocking the way. The light is illuminating where he had been. He's not there because, as I realize, he's ducking chasing us. I scream and run blindly forward into the woods, my friend behind me. We ran for at least 20 minutes, and eventually I couldn't hear his footsteps or his breathing, which had been heavy and grunty. We stop and pick our way out of the woods via a yard, then walk home in silence. I'm pretty sure I was almost abducted that day. I think about it often. Phantom hitchhiker. When I was 21-ish, I worked in a remote area that was a 40-minute commute one way. I also worked a lot of nights. I saw the hitchhiker 3 times, in the same spot, wearing the same clothes. He was a middle-aged Latino in a maroon shirt, a plaid jacket, and a red baseball hat. At first, I thought he was a dairy worker. There were a couple nearby, but nearby was still 3 miles. That wasn't even taking into consideration that he was wearing a heavy coat in the middle of summer. I kept driving. I saw him again months later, in the same clothes, in the same spot. I actually got a better look this time because it was winter and raining so hard my wiper blades could barely keep up, but he didn't seem to see me. He was looking down the road past me. Anybody standing in rain coming down that hard would have been soaked, but he wasn't. The final time was shortly before I quit that job. It was early summer, and my hours had changed slightly, so when I saw him again, the sun was just starting to set. Then what I had suspected was confirmed. His shirt wasn't maroon like I thought. It was stained with blood. I passed by that spot twice a day. There were new crosses going up on that road all the time because it was flat and straight with nothing around except the odd dairy or corn field for miles. It was known for being a bad stretch where lots of people died. I never noticed the cross where he stood because it had fallen over. When I left that job for the last time, I pulled over where he stood, found his cross, and propped it up again. It said Poppy. That was almost 20 years ago. I hope he finally gets picked up. Last fall, my now fiancé and I went to this little carnival thing. Being in a small, boring town, it wasn't much fun. So we decided to walk to what we call our building. In short, it's one of the many ancient abandoned buildings in this place. It's falling apart, and honestly, it isn't very safe. But we go anyway. We end up doing some things that couples should never do in public. But I thought, hey, it's dark and deserted. What could go wrong? So we're there, just having a great time, when all of a sudden I see something off in the distance, across from the train tracks. I focus my gaze and realize it's a humanoid figure. It's huge. All huge. And incredibly skinny. It looks to be a man and is holding this strange little light. The light isn't falling on anything, It's just there, moving in the dude's hand while he approaches us. I jump up and tell my fiancée to get dressed. She sees it too. While she's getting dressed, she accidentally drops her purse, and out comes all her girly shit. I look away from her and back at the thing, and it's gone. I don't relax, though. I suddenly feel this hair standing up on the back of your neck, now creeping out. I look back at my fiancée as she's cleaning up the rest of her things, then turn back to the road where the dude is. And he's there. Except he's closer. He's right in front of our building. The light is gone, and all I see is this giant thing just standing there. I can't make it out. The only lighting is from the dim, orangish streetlights. But I can tell it's there, and I can feel its eyes on me. I get in front of my fiancée. I don't know what to do. I'm a small dude, but I've been in plenty of fights and won most of them. Except this thing is giving me a different feeling. I don't think it wants to fight. I don't think it's some loser on the bad side of town. I think it's something paranormal. I don't want to take my eyes off of it, but I have to check back on my fiancée. I glance back at her, and she's closing her purse. Then I look back at the thing, and it's gone again. I tell her to run, and we book it out of there. Like I said, that happened last fall. What is the creepiest part? I've seen it again recently. While not terribly creepy, it was still weird as all hell to me. I was driving home from a friend's house at 2 or 3 in the morning. Late, I know. I decided to take a shortcut through this back road because I was tired. The road is sort of through these woods, and during certain times of the year, it could get very foggy. I see through the fog what looks like a deer walking on the road, but it was walking very strangely. I slow down my car so I don't spook it and hit it. As I'm getting closer, I realize this deer is way too big to be a deer. I drive a Kia Soul, and it is taller than my car. Suddenly, I realize what animal I'm looking at. It's a ducking dog. A massive, pitch-black Great Dane. It's winter, and it's cold, and I roll down my window to see if there's a collar so I can take this dog home. When I open my window, this dog comes up to my car and sticks his head inside. It has to bend down to reach the window. Now, I love dogs. I've never been afraid of dogs in my life, but that thing's massive ducking head right next to mine was a little unsettling. It could easily fit my head in its mouth. Oh. And since it was night, its eyes were glowing. There was no collar, and the dog finally walked into the forest. I'm not gonna lie, I felt like I saw the black shuck that night, and no one believes me. It was truly an amazing sight. I had just gotten home from a night of partying. I went to my room to watch a movie and lay down. Suddenly, I had this feeling that I wasn't alone in my house. It was as if there was a different energy with me. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it felt like. It's kind of like when a TV is on and you can't feel or hear the high-pitched ringing. I could tell that I wasn't alone, so I turned down my TV, and I heard whispering. I instantly sober up, peek out my door, and the whispering becomes more clear. I have 3 dogs, and none of them were barking or growling, so I just thought I was being irrational. So I closed my door and went back to watching. After about 10 minutes, I realize I can't get comfortable, and that feeling of not being alone hasn't subsided yet. So I get up and walk down my hallway toward my kitchen. My house is an open concept house, so the kitchen is a giant space that also includes the dining room and living room. I'm getting a drink of water at the sink, and through the reflection of the window, I notice a man or woman sitting on my couch. They were whispering inaudibly to my dogs. I instantly turned around, and I asked them what they were doing in my house. He or she said they just wanted to sleep on my couch. I live alone, so I started getting more aggressive towards this person because I was starting to panic more. I kept repeating, "You need to leave now before I call the RCMP." And then the person breaks down in tears, talking about people watching them, how they were being followed, and that they told him to go to my house. He points towards my kitchen and starts crying more, asking me if I could see them. He said they were watching and laughing. He started calling me Morgan and begging to let him stay in my house because it was safe. I called the police, who showed up within 10 minutes, and after he was in custody, they told me that he had a knife and was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. He had entered through a back door that was unlocked and had apparently been unlocked for a while. I live alone, and I've never unlocked it. When I was in 5th grade, my parents divorced. My dad kept the house I grew up in, and my mom moved into a divided house/apartment setup with her soon-to-be new husband. On Halloween night, my mom took me and my siblings trick-or-treating in the small town that the apartment occupied. At the end of the night, my mom took us back to the new apartment to spend the night. The furniture wasn't due to be moved in for a few more days, so we slept in sleeping bags in the living room. I was already on edge because it was a new place, and the living room had a huge window that faced the sidewalk, so anyone could walk up the porch and look right in. At some point during the night, I had to go to the bathroom. I got up, crossed the room, and went to the downstairs bathroom. Before I could go, I swear I heard a voice say, "Hello." I jumped because it sounded like it was coming from the same room as me, right behind my head. It was a high-pitched voice, almost like that of a little girl, but not quite. Like an adult trying to fake a child's voice, if that makes sense. It sounded happy, like you were greeting someone you hadn't seen in a while. It didn't sound like either of my sisters or my mom. I just waited in the bathroom for a bit, then eventually calmed down and went back to sleep. A couple of weird things happened while we lived there. Sometimes toys would go missing, there would be weird noises, and my future stepdad even fell down the stairs once after tripping over a hamper that no one can remember putting there, but nothing that logic or reason can't explain. At the end of 6th grade, we moved out of the apartment and into a house outside of town. The last time I was ever there, I was leaving to catch the school bus but stopped in the bathroom beforehand. As I finished washing my hands, the same exact voice popped up and said, "Goodbye," this time kind of sad sounding. I spent a lot of time in the woods and occasionally camp in the bed of my truck with a tarp tented over it. While this makes for great rain protection, I can't see out at all. I was camping in Georgia, up in the Allegheny Mountains. It was a foggy night, which isn't uncommon, and I was laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep when a bunch of coyotes started howling and barking not too far away. This isn't too unusual, but I'm still not totally used to it. What happened next, though, is what was so creepy. Normally, when coyotes go off, it builds up and then dies off slowly. I heard a coyote yelp as if it had been injured, and it went dead silent. Then I heard a quiet crunch of the leaves as something got closer. Then came the crunch of the stones as it got to where I was parked. Then it was silent. It was then that the distinct sound of a nail on my truck's side rang through my ears like nails on a chalkboard. Something was just feet from me. Then nothing. It brushed my tarp, and that was the last of it. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I got out, and all I could find was a scratch on the side of my truck from the nails and a single coyote footprint. My guess is that a coyote hurt itself, which spooked them, and one came in close to check out the smells of my camp. But that night had to be one of the absolutely creepiest nights of my life. So, there's this old bridge in my town that's supposedly haunted by a young girl who drowned in the river beneath it. Apparently, if you came at the right time, you could hear her scream. When me and my buddies were in high school, we had nothing better to do than go ghost hunting. Being from a town of 6,000 people in good old southern Illinois, half of that being prison inmates and mental health patients, you have to get a bit creative to have any sort of fun. Anyway, we get to this bridge at about 3 a.m., and we sit there for a while. Nothing. About 20 minutes went by, and we were all skeptical. Everyone was joking about how dumb this was or trying to creep each other out. All of a sudden, screaming. The most blood-curdling, high-pitched screaming you've ever heard. It wasn't just one scream, either. It never stopped, it kept going even as we were driving away in our cars. But that's not even the worst part. Me and one of my buddies hightailed it back to the cars as soon as we heard the initial scream, because you had to walk a bit downhill to get underneath the bridge. Halfway back, we both go from sprinting to a dead stop at the exact same moment. I never asked him what he saw because I saw it for myself. It was a girl, running on all fours into the woods. I don't talk about this much because it gives me chills just thinking about it, and nobody ever takes me seriously. If you knew me in real life, I would not have the ability to lie. Just not there for me. I had always believed in ghosts because I was raised watching scary movies and watching Ghost Adventures, or TAPS in a way. This was one of the best experiences of my life. To experience something like this is unlike anything else. Just knowing that maybe there is something after we die is comforting in a way. I was babysitting this little girl, and she said there's another little girl that visits her every night. She said this little girl used to live there, but she died, and now she comes back to play with her. I was a little weirded out by that, but I didn't believe in ghosts, so I just assumed she was making up stories. That night, after I put her to bed, I heard commotion in her room, so I went upstairs, and she was on the floor playing. I told her she had to go to bed, but she said her friend wanted to keep playing. But there was no one else in the room, so I assumed she was just being a kid and making things up. When the parents came home, I told them everything was fine, and the little girl behaved. When I got in my car to leave, I looked up in the little girl's window because the light was on, and I saw a different little girl looking at me through the window. This was not the little girl I was babysitting. It was a dark-haired girl in a bluish dress. The girl I was watching was blonde and in pajamas. It scared the hell out of me, and I never went back to babysit for them again. I also believe in ghosts now because I know exactly what I saw, and it was not a figment of my imagination. When my brother and I were around 4 or 5, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A bit freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so we called out for him. Shit. Both parents came out of the kitchen, on the opposite side of the stairs and isolated from the living room. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, and we never spoke about it. Then, about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her the story. Literally seconds later, my phone bleeps. It was my brother saying, "I was just talking to my partner about paranormal shit, do you remember the guy in the top hat?" I was 14, and my sister was 13. We lived in a town in Pennsylvania that doesn't really exist anymore. It was summer, hot, no air conditioning. This is maybe 3 years before my parents got central air. We had the windows open the entire summer, like every summer. We lived near a creek and could hear it babbling if it rained really hard the day before. In the summer, it was always low, so we never heard it during those months. Other than insects and cars driving down the interstate towards or away from the quarry mine, if you were on our property, you didn't hear much. It was not rural, but almost. There was a frosty freeze and 6 to 7 other shops about 2 miles away. My parents went out on a date and left my sister and me home. 2 young girls, but we had been left at home for almost 3 to 4 years at this point. We were used to it. We cooked a pizza and were watching TV after our parents left. The phone rang just as we heard what sounded like a person somersaulting across the roof of our house. My sister answered the phone, but when she picked it up, she heard nothing but static, but not the usual static noise. She explained it like a slowed down static hum, like if a TV channel mixed with an egg beater on low. She said hello a few more times, listened to the egg beater static for a few more seconds, then hung up. We went back to watching TV and thought nothing of it. Maybe 40 minutes later, we hear footsteps on the roof. Very soft footsteps. I remember listening to almost 10 before looking at my sister, who was also looking at me with a white face in complete shock. Eventually, we came up with the nerve to get up and go outside and look. Just barely visible behind our large, already outdated TV antenna was a man lying face down on our roof. He was tall, skinny, and had huge white tennis shoes on. He was kind of an outline except for his shoes, which seemed to glow. My sister was spooked. I was crazy. I started to scream at the man. I threw a few small rocks and missed him terribly. He didn't move. My sister was tugging at me to get back inside. Finally, after realizing the man wasn't moving, I freaked out and ran inside too. We huddled in my parents' room. Nothing for almost 20 minutes. I felt like 2 hours. Our parents weren't due home until midnight, and we had no way of reaching them in 1995. Then we hear a knocking sound, like the man is knocking on our roof, like it was a front door. I had had enough. I rush outside, dragging my sister, ready to confront this crazy person. We now see him lying face down on the first top line of the roof. His arms and feet were dangling on either side of the lip. We freak. Lock ourselves in the basement. Our parents find us in the morning. I pissed myself while sleeping. I never found out what it was about, and my dad thought we were lying. In my freshman year of college, my friend said he knew of a haunted house in his neighborhood, which was relatively close to campus. I had never been a big believer in ghosts, so I thought this would be fun to go see and mess around with. The story was that the father of the family who lived in the house had gotten out of prison and proceeded to kill his wife and twins in the house. When we got there, 3 of my friends stayed in the car, and 1 got out but wouldn't go past the sidewalk. My friend, who told us about the house, said he has never seen a person knock on the front door. I took this as a challenge because I said I wouldn't get scared. I run up and knock on the door, and after 3 knocks, my friend who was on the sidewalk let out an ear-piercing, bloody scream I've never heard him repeat since. I turn around to see the 4 of them in the car driving down the street, leaving me stranded at this house. I finally catch up to them 3 blocks away, and I get in the car and say, "What the hell, guys?" I look at my friend who screamed, and he is just sitting in the backseat of the car, rocking back and forth, mumbling words none of us could comprehend. After about 10 minutes of us asking him what was wrong, he suddenly sat straight up and looked at me with this look of pure fear I've never seen before and said, "When you knocked on the door, the ghosts of the 2 twins appeared in the upstairs window waving at me to come in the house." Like I said at the beginning, I never believed in ghosts, and to this day, I don't 100% believe, but the way my friend acted during that 10 to 15 minute time period scared even me because I've never seen anyone so legitimately scared in my life. My parents moved us to a new farmhouse in rural New Zealand when I was about 8. Right from the start, things were not right. You could tell families with children had lived there before, as there were swings in the trees, and I found old toys in the gardens, etc. There was a very ominous presence and feeling in that place that even I, at 8 years old, could feel. Firstly, my mother tried to plant flowers around the house, and without fail, they were dead within days of planting. She tried everything to correct it, from new soil to fertilizer, but nothing was dead. In my playtime in the yard, I started to notice all around the boundaries of the property were animal bones and carcasses, small animals like rabbits and hedgehogs, all scattered around the perimeter but never inside, all outside, like they tried to cross the threshold and drop dead. New Zealand is cold, and my dad loved a good fire. He would get the fireplace absolutely roaring like an inferno, and the house refused to heat. Only standing directly in front of it would you feel any heat, but the wall of chilled air always felt like a more powerful force. Attached to the garage was a large playroom where, naturally, all my toys and belongings lived. This was the negative energy epicenter for the house. Something was definitely in there, and it commanded my attention. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its every move, and it was angry. The energy felt like a wild animal pacing back and forth at one end of the room, and if I kept to the other end, it was manageable and almost calmed down as long as I kept my distance. In one corner of the end of the room was a large stain on the carpet tiles, with a 3-4 foot radius. It was dark in color and looked like it had tried to be cleaned with a mop, as it had smears through it. When I got too close to that stain, there was a crushing sense of being watched and looked down upon. So one clear, cold night, I woke up wide awake and sat up in bed. My room was right at the end of the hallway, the final destination, so to speak, if you were walking down there, and I heard the light footsteps of a child running excitedly. As I heard this, I looked to my left at the doorway, and there she was. A small girl, roughly 4 to 5 years old, at a guess. She had her hair in pigtails, and her top half looked to be in a singlet that a young girl would wear to bed. She was clutching a teddy bear, and from just below her waist, she faded into a beautiful light blue shimmering mist that, as I remember, subtly illuminated my room. This young girl filled me with the most serene sense of calm. I was not scared or alarmed at all. She kind of had me locked in a trance, staring at her. She had worry on her face, though, and it looked as though she was afraid of being caught with me. In my catatonic state, I managed to utter what I can only remember as some sort of greeting, and as soon as I did, she recoiled like a shy child does when being greeted by someone new and strange. She moved back into the doorway of the room and faded until the blue mist turned to darkness again. I lay down again in complete peace and drifted to sleep. Talking about it years later to my family, I feel like something happened to that girl in that playroom, and maybe she tried to reach out to me, as I was also a child, in her domain. It remains my absolute clearest memory to this day. My cousin, Danny, was about 17 years old. He came to live at my house because his father was an abusive jerk. I was 15 years old at that time. My cousin Danny worked at a local McDonald's. He had gotten off work at closing time, which was midnight back in 1994. He stopped by home and let my mother, his aunt, know he was going to give a friend a ride home and he would be back soon. He asked if I and my best friend wanted to ride with him so he wouldn't have to drive home alone. It was a weekend, so my mother said it was fine. His friend lived way out in the middle of nowhere. So my cousin was driving, his friend was in the passenger seat, and my best friend and I were in the back seat. We turned off of a paved county road onto a gravel road. We traveled this road often because there were a lot of ponds on it that we fished often. There were no other lights but the lights of the car. As we came around a bend in the road, we saw it. It had its back to us. My cousin stopped the car very quickly, and we slid on the gravel road some. It was bent over and eating a dead deer that was in the grass on the side of the road. It looked like a naked man, but it had what looked like flaps of skin on both shoulder blades. It looked over its shoulder and then stood up. It was about 7 feet tall. It turned around, and we could clearly see that it was a male, but it looked like a bat. It had the face of a bat but the body of a very toned man. It just looked at us. We were too scared to move, and we didn't scream or anything. Then it just unfolded the flaps of skin on his back and flew away. Just like a bat would. We freaked out and took off out of there. I dropped off my cousin's friend at his house and took a different road home. We tried to tell my mother and others, but no one would ever believe us. I've tried to look up anything that may resemble it, and I have found the Mothman to be the closest thing, but it's not what we saw. I'm 38 years old now, and still to this day, I will never forget it. When I was growing up, my family lived in a small, 2-bedroom trailer. My older sister and I had one room, while my parents shared the other. My mom was convinced that it was haunted. From her bed, she could see an old reclining chair in the living room. Some nights she would suddenly wake up and see an old man sitting in it, staring out the window. She'd always wake my dad up and send him to go investigate. He'd stomp in the room and turn the empty chair around. Just be my mom having an overactive imagination. However, my friend seemed freaked out by the story. She asked my parents where the trailer was. We lived in a small village, so it wasn't hard to pinpoint, and it turns out that one of her brother's best friends bought the trailer from the older couple that my parents had sold the place to. The whole family swore the place was haunted. They always talked about how the spirit of an old man would sit in a chair in the living room and stare out the window. The trailer passed through a number of different hands before burning down a few years ago. Me and my best buddy were in my basement playing a few games of air hockey. We decided to play with the lights off to give ourselves a challenge, as playing regularly was getting boring. It was early afternoon, so there was still enough light coming through the basement windows to see everything clearly. On the other side of the basement, my dad had a workshop table with a 1980s radio that could scan hundreds of frequencies. To turn the radio on or off, you would need to apply some force with your finger, as the switch sometimes gets stuck. As we're playing our last round before heading back upstairs, the radio switches on. We both stopped and looked at the radio, which was just generating static noise. That itself was odd because the radio is always dialed to a popular radio station. As we're just standing there bewildered, a male voice begins speaking and says something along the lines of, "Death seems so far in everyone's mind, but it's always just around the corner." The menace in the sound of the man's voice made it incredibly creepy. The voice and the static disappeared a few seconds later. Me and my buddy ran to the lights and turned them on as if they would provide sudden relief, which they did not. My adrenaline was pumping, but I was always curious as a kid and slowly walked up to the radio. I was completely shocked when I saw that the switch on the radio was off. Me and my friend to this day still don't know what to make of what happened. This happened a couple weeks ago and is the most recent creepy moment I can recall. I on and off again babysit this 2-year-old while his parents have a date night. Once before, my friend was babysitting him, and he started talking to his grandpa, whom his parents say he never met as he had died before the kid was born. So whenever I babysit him, I prepare for something weird like that to happen again. Of course, this night we were in his living room, and he pointed at an empty wall in front of us. "Grandpa," is all he says. He's 2 and doesn't talk a whole lot, so I didn't ask for an explanation. Instead, I start talking about other things because it's creeping me out. The kid then widens his eyes and grips the chair he's sitting in, chattering his teeth and shaking uncontrollably. Here's me freaking the duck out, so I grab him and tell him that it's time to watch a movie before bed. Later that night, I was about to take him upstairs when I noticed the door was unlocked. I locked it and turned the knob, shaking the door, to reaffirm that it's locked. I do this without fail to every door I lock. It's a dumb quirk, and then carried him upstairs to bed since he's already half asleep. I'm in his room browsing for about 20 minutes, and when he's finally out, I leave him and go back downstairs. The front door is directly in front of the stairs, and guess what? The door is ducking unlocked. Immediately, I think that this is going to be a horror movie and that it's a smart idea to check around the house. Nothing out of the ordinary. I even go upstairs to check on the kid again. I didn't bother looking in the other bedrooms because I had his door open when we were laying in there and would have seen anyone come up. Anyway, after making sure he's okay, I go back downstairs and watch TV until his parents get home, jumping at every little noise. It was the weirdest night of my life, and I had to debate for a solid hour when they asked me to watch him again a couple days later. While in college, I came back to my apartment one afternoon to find some girl I didn't know in my living room. This wasn't all that unusual, as my roommates often had visitors at all hours, and she said she knew at least one of them. After some casual banter, she announced she needed to go grocery shopping, and she offered to cook me dinner if I went with her and helped her out. She was kind of cute, so I decided to walk with her and see what happened. At the supermarket, she asked me what I wanted to eat and then invited me to her place, where she cooked a meal for us. After dinner, we had sex through the night into the wee hours. Taking a break from sexy times, we talked about random stuff. One of the things we talked about was a local guy our age who had apparently killed his parents and disappeared. The guy's whereabouts were at that time still unknown, and there was a massive police manhunt going on to locate him. Well, at one point, the girl said, "I don't think he did it." She sounded so sure of this that I asked why she thought that, when all the news stories strongly suggested his guilt. To my shock, she said, "Because he was my boyfriend." I realized then that I was in the bed of the girlfriend of a murderer at large. I didn't sleep the rest of the night for fear that a killer was going to jump out of a closet and hack me to bits. The next morning, I politely excused myself and racked my brain the entire way back to my place about how and if I should distance myself from this person. On the one hand, she was attractive, cooked a nice meal, and seemed to want to have sex with me, a big plus. On the other hand, she might have a jealous boyfriend who likes to kill people. The if part was answered when I got to my apartment to find my roommates all gathered in the living room. They'd been wondering where I'd been. It turns out some girl had seen me on the street and followed me home a day or so before, then came back and more or less invited herself in. The girl they were talking about was the girl with whom I had spent the night. So the girlfriend of a murderer at large had stalked me and seduced me. She confirmed this a couple days later, when I finally worked up the nerve to talk to her again for the last time. The ex was found some weeks later. He had indeed ended his family and a couple more people along the way before he was captured. Back in 10th grade, me and a group of friends were just exploring around houses, up to no good. It was about 1 a.m. at night, and my friend lives in the woods, so about all we could see was the light made from our phones in front of us. Right before we head back to the house, one of my friends thinks it's funny to just lose the group and scare us. I see him trail the group and walk off into the trees. It's 1 a.m, we're a bit tired, and we don't want to fall for his bullshit, so we wait at the same spot where he left us. About 20 minutes pass and we hear rustling in the trees. Good, he's finally coming out. We see a shadowy figure come out of the woods, and we all decide to run at our friend and give him a huge group hug. As soon as we all start running, the figure runs back into the woods, panting, and me and my friends are all screaming at him. At this point, we give up, so we just go back to the house, and there's our friend, completely asleep. We wake him up, and he says that he went back to the house to try and scare us there, but we took too long, and he fell asleep. We told him about the figure we saw, and he said he was asleep before that. I didn't get much sleep for a few nights after that. When I was around 8 years old, I slept over at a friend's house. This wasn't my first sleepover, and it wasn't my first time at his house, so I was pretty comfortable around the place. Nothing spectacular happened until around 4 a.m. I woke up to my friend shaking me awake and saying, "Hey, follow me. I want to show you something." It was too dark to see him, but I could see the outlines of the furniture and doorways. This didn't strike me as odd at the time. I followed him out to the living room, and I turned right toward the front door, assuming he went there. I heard him speak from the kitchen. "Where are you going?" "I'm over here, silly." I tell him I'm still half asleep, and I walk toward him. I follow the sound of his footsteps to and out of the back door. The first odd thing I noticed was that the door had already been opened. I didn't hear it at any point. When I get outside, the moon is bright enough that I can see the backyard. I don't see my friend, but I see footprints leading to his dad's open workshop. I walk inside the door, and I just feel off. His dad had made it pretty clear that we shouldn't be in there. I finally have the thought that maybe I should turn on a light, and when I flip the switch, I notice all the very sharp tools and then the table saw. The blade was spinning down as if it had been on and had just recently turned off. I didn't see my friend inside, so I flipped off the light, shut the door, and nodded back to bed. Before I could lay back down on the air mattress, I noticed my friend was still very asleep in his bed. I couldn't figure it out, and it took me a few hours to finally fall back asleep. The next morning, his dad came back from his workshop and shouted at us something along the lines of, "What the duck were you guys doing in my shed?" I responded with some lies about sleepwalking, but I woke up once I got inside, turned on the light, and went back to bed. He called bullshit and said I had thrown his tools all over the place. My friend's mom told him to stop yelling at me, and he stormed back to his shop, and I decided it was time to leave. The following school day, my friend was pissed at me. He said his dad made him go inside the shed and help clean up. Apparently, it was wrecked. I tried to tell him what happened, but he wasn't having any of it. We stayed friends up until about my sophomore year of high school, and he never mentioned anything paranormal or strange happening in his house. It did not exactly happen to me, but to my father. He married another woman, my mom, and the old one promised that if he has a child with my mother, then he shall serve the dead and that she will not let us leave happily with the child. She said he as she knew that my father would have a son. My father is not a superstitious person, so he didn't really care. From what my father says, when I reached the age of 6, I woke up during the night, went to my parents' bedroom, and stood next to my mom. My father is a light sleeper, so he looks at me in the dim light and asks what happened. After staying for a few seconds in silence, I turn my head over to my dad and say, "Greg, shut up. I'm figuring out how to kill this shit." My father's old wife was the only person to ever call him Greg. After that day, several creepy events happened to me until my mom brought me to church. My father is an avid atheist, but he says that the only time that he would truly be able to believe in the existence of the devil was back then, when I was 6. 2. My mother's cousin has this weird habit of waking up in the middle of the night and showing money to the moon. I know this sounds stupid as hell, but she believes until this day that by showing money to the moon, you can get more. On a side note, me and the 5-year-old boy were sleeping in the same room, while the older boy was sleeping in his own room. So, when my mother's cousin was getting outside, she passed the room where the 9-year-old boy was sleeping and heard some noise, something like mumbling. She thought that he was on his Nintendo again until late at night, so she opened the door. My mother's cousin started trembling, as she didn't know what the hell was going on. The 9-year-old boy was sitting on the floor with a knife in his hand, nodding while I was sitting on the bed, and smiling while looking at the door. She took the knife from her son, brought us to my mom, and woke her up. My mother's cousin explained the whole situation, and my mom kindly asked me what's happening because the 9-year-old boy refused to talk. I fell back asleep. This is when my mother found out that I sleepwalk. The interesting part is that the 5-year-old boy suddenly rushes into the room crying, saying that the bad lady in his room wants to cut all of us. To this day, the 9-year-old boy didn't say a single word about the event, he just refused to talk in his youth about that, and now he doesn't remember it. The 5-year-old boy doesn't remember his dream either. But both my mother and her cousin were shocked SHless. I grew up in the boonies of South Dakota. I was one of very few kids who lived way the hell out where my folks' homestead was. I grew up fearless of most things nature could throw at us: twisters, blizzards, and forest fires. Mountain lions, diamondbacks, and rabid coyotes. Even the occasional escapee from bear country USA, grizzlies and wolves and even big whitetail bucks, had no idea that they ought to be scared of humans. I grew up with all that. I grew up more than able to defend myself and think my way out of trouble. So what the hell was it, then, that I ran into that night? I was 21 then, graduated from the School of Mines and about to start medical school at Sanford, when I went out in the same stretch of woods I've been in all my life for a nighttime stroll with the man who's now my husband of 6 years. He's an engineer. I can't ducking explain it either. All I know is that we crossed into this gap, where the county road becomes an artificial land bridge across a narrow ravine. That ravine runs down into Owl Canyon, which in turn joins up with Spring Canyon on its way south to Reptile Gardens. Look it up on a map. I ain't shitting you. But Owl Canyon ain't a good place to be. Even the Lakota don't leave prayer bundles there. There's an old well down there, carved out of solid sandstone, even though there's a freshwater creek running right next to it. I've drank out of that creek, there's nothing wrong or tainted about it. So why dig a whole new well in the coldest part of that remote ravine that never held any gold-bearing quartz seams and that even a century and a half ago didn't mean anything to anyone? My future husband and I went for a walk one night, beneath the bright blue-white glow of the full moon. Both people of science and skepticism, in fairness, more than me, and as we crossed the tree-lined artificial bridge made over Owl Canyon, I froze. Something was watching us out of the shadows of the pine trees. I knew it in every fiber of my being. He knew it, too, though he'd never seen or been faced by a predator before. You know, after just one encounter with a rattler, a lion, or a bear, you never, ever forget the way it feels to be viewed as prey. But he's seen action in Iraq. We went back to back on the bridge. No weapons of any kind, just trying hard to project some kind of ferocity, some level of Jedi duck-off vibes, as we crept our way back towards the lights of my parents' house. Whatever it was, it followed us right up the porch. I never saw it definitively, but I would swear on any holy text you'd care to name that it didn't give up on taking us for prey until we'd crossed the threshold of the house and shut the door. There were tracks in the dirt the next morning. My soon-to-be husband can't read them worth a duck, and I didn't point them out to him. It looked like a lion's, but bigger. The claws were out, scoring deep marks in the dirt like a big dog's. To this day, I don't know what it was. But I've never felt fear like that before or since. If anyone's got a suggestion for past skinwalkers, I'd love to hear it. During a training period out in the woods, we had no less than 4 different incidents. I was witness only to one. None of us shared these experiences with the entire group, so it wasn't until after that they came to light. I'll tell it in the order that they were revealed, because what makes it creepy is how unlikely it is that this was just a story corroborated as a prank. My first experience was pulling guard duty. There was an entire company in the woods here, but we occupied a large area, so while there were about 8 people awake at this time, only one was even close to me, and he was on the far side of our area. I was tired, as I was in the middle of the night. I directly saw small shadows pacing back and forth along our perimeter, which I was only about 10 meters behind. At first, I thought it was coyotes or something, but they made no sound and moved way too fast. It was as if they wanted to enter our area but were too afraid to. My partner on guard duty approached me from behind to ask why I had raised my rifle. We knew we weren't going to be hit by a simulated attack tonight, and we only had blanks. I must have instinctively done it. When I looked back, the shadows were gone. I lied about just being bored, and we finished our shift, and I passed out. The next day, during a break, someone asked if we believed in the paranormal or had seen spooky things. I didn't really think the events the prior night were particularly strange. It was dark, I was tired, people see things. But I started to explain that something odd had happened. Just as I finished telling it, another member came up to the group. He asked what we were talking about, and someone said I saw spooky shit last night. Before I could really say anything, he asked if I saw them too. Intrigued, I let him tell his story first. He explained that last night, his shift was just before mine. He saw several figures inside our perimeter. We all slept along the perimeter. The middle was reserved for equipment. He thought it was members of the unit fully kitted up with all their gear, but then he noticed they were faceless and had far more gear than we had. It was more akin to an actual deployment, not the BS training we were doing. He said they were taking knees as if in security and watching over the area. He said they seemed to acknowledge that he saw them but did not react. After a couple minutes, they seemed to just vanish. By now, everyone listening was pretty excited and ready to go tell everyone who hadn't been around to hear these stories. We went up to the squad next to us and asked if they saw any spooky shit during training. Sure enough, one of them explained that, like 4 days earlier, while we were all in tents and separated, guys were in one tent and girls were in another. One of the guys told us that he had woken up to find faceless soldiers taking a knee at the end of every cot in the tent as if they were stopped in a security halt, watching over us as we slept. He described them as being dressed in modern equipment and very detailed, except for a blurry, blank face. Now, technically speaking, these two could have discussed this prior, but one of them had a bit of a stutter, and I had heard him brief a plan several times at this point. I knew what he sounded like when he was nervous or reading from a script. I was and am convinced they had not spoken about these experiences prior. The final, though technically first, event was revealed at the completion of training. The unit had only a few girls, and none had been present when we discussed these events in the field. When we got back to the barracks, the topic came up again, only this time in the presence of the girls. One, whom the prior two individuals did not associate with heavily outside of direct training, explained that while we were in the tents, she had awoken to figures standing over the cots in the female tents watching over everyone sleeping. Their tent was not full, and the empty cots did not have anyone. Again, the individuals were dressed as soldiers and were faceless. The only differences were that they were dressed in older outfits, which she said she thought were like World War II, not modern, and that they were standing, not kneeling. She said she called out to them and that they nodded but didn't answer. She explained that they seemed oddly comforting and not threatening at all, so she closed her eyes and went back to sleep. When I was 13, I had to walk home every weekday from the train station after school. Occasionally I'd hang out with some friends at a library near the station after school. We used the computer game there to play random games like RuneScape. This particular incident happened on a particular Monday night when I began heading home at around 7:30 p.m. It was already almost pitch dark as I began my walk home. The first section of my walk home involved going down a very narrow, long street where there was only a footpath on the left side of the road, train tracks on the other side. The street lights were few and far between. As I was walking down the street, I noticed a white haze in the distance. I didn't think too much of it, as I imagined it was just a combination of my relatively poor eyesight and it being so dark. As I got closer, I realized it was actually a person walking towards me, except the shape was a bit odd, and the person appeared very tall, large, and almost glowing white despite there being no street lights between us. As I got closer, that's when things started getting really creepy. I finally realized that it was what appeared to be a lady wearing a full wedding dress walking towards me. I was already quite nervous by this stage, and I thought about turning around and running back. Then my logical mind persuaded me that I was simply overreacting and to just keep going and see what it was. The stupid horror movie trope got me. As I got closer, my heart started beating so fast that it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I realized I had to move to the side of the road to avoid this person, and she made no movements, which indicated she was even acknowledging my presence. As she walked past me, I tried to look at her face but couldn't see clearly through the veil. She also appeared to float straight past me and that there were no noticeable footstep movements in the way she walked. It was like she didn't even notice or see me the whole time. She just keeps going forward, not changing her posture at all. After I finally got past her, I started Olympic walking to create more distance between us. After about 5 houses down, I finally had the guts to look back. And she was just gone. Completely out of sight. I proceeded to sprint the rest of my way home. I always try to rationalize that she went into one of those houses between us when I wasn't looking and that she was just a lady who either recently got married, was about to get married, or had some serious mental issues. But honestly, it still confuses me to this day what exactly it was that I witnessed that night. There's a huge oak tree on my parents' property. When I was a kid, I remember students would come and do studies on it to give you a reference to how big this ducker was. Last I heard, it was 115 feet tall and almost 5 feet wide. That's really tall for an oak, smarter people can confirm. Anyway, it was when I was in 5th or 6th grade and around October. All the leaves were off the tree, and one morning my dad got up and let out the dogs as he usually does. The dogs start going crazy and wake me up, and I go outside. It's still dark, but I could tell something was peculiar. The tree was covered in turkey vultures, and I mean covered. I honestly think 200 or so. There were so many that the wildlife department came to our house. They actually came 4 times in 2 days, because people driving by were confused and calling. There were so many vultures in our tree that you couldn't see a branch. We couldn't let the dogs outside. And none of them were flying, they all just sat there staring at us for 2 days. On the 3rd day, we woke up, and there were no vultures in the tree. It was crazy. I still remember all the grass under the tree's branches dying because the vultures spit so much. Even stranger, my parents have never seen a turkey vulture near the property since. And it happened 15 years ago, but that was some weird SHT to witness. I currently live in my family's 1860s log cabin, which was built by my great-great-great ancestors. My dog and I moved there about 2 years ago because the place was empty and Grandma was in danger of losing it to the government to pay for medical care. Anyway, about a year ago I was in the process of planning a very large remodel, so there were lots of people in and out of the house, poking and prodding, if you will, to discover the building's secrets that had been hidden for the past 100+ years. There have always been little things that got my mind wondering. A loud thud from the empty upper floor, my dog barking at dark corners in the living room and kitchen, things going missing for days and then mysteriously appearing. One chilly fall morning, about 2 a.m., I was suddenly woken up by the sound of my dog's ID and rabies tags clinking together and the gentle rustling of him playing at the end of my bed. I rolled over to take a look at what was going on, and there was a small boy standing at the end of my bed playing with my dog and rubbing his belly as he excitedly shuffled back and forth. Thinking I was dreaming, I looked away, put my glasses on, and turned back to the end of the bed. He was still standing there in what I can only describe as tattered farm clothes from the early 1900s, maybe. I didn't feel a sense of fear but rather confusion. The harder I stared at this little boy's figure, the less detailed it became until he finally faded away as if he were never there. I have no idea who it was that visited us that night, but I have a feeling that he was a relative. My experience was in my childhood home. My mom would forever say it was haunted, and even at a young age, I was like, sure, Mom, yep, whatever. My bedroom was in the basement, and I would frequently see a man's legs walking past my window in the middle of the night. My dad, unconcerned, was like, it's probably someone cutting across our massive yard to get to the opposite end of the road. Looking back now, it's like, WTF, Dad, really? That yard was like 3 acres, why would some dude need to walk directly in front of my window? But whatever. So one night I'm chilling in my room when I see a bunch of bizarre movement behind one of my many Spice Girls posters hanging up in my room. It looked like maybe a bat was moving around behind the poster. I screamed, and my dad ran down, saw the movement, grabbed a baseball bat, and just pounded the shit out of the poster and wall until the movement stopped. We take down the poster, look behind it, and nothing. No bat, not even any marks from where my 6 feet 6 inches huge dad smashed a bat into the wall. Nothing. We just looked at each other and said, you saw that too, right? This was in the 90s, I still don't have an answer for what happened to this day, and any time I bring it up to my dad, he just says, I don't want to talk about it. We sold that house very shortly after. I spent a lot of time with one set of grandparents in my youth. They watched me while my parents worked all week and kept me all summer at this campground. I had been coming there and staying all summer from ages 2 to 13 and have so many fond memories. There is one, however, that has definitely stuck with me over the years. I was 6 years old on this particular occasion, and my best friend, 8 years old, was spending a few days with us at the campground. Now, we only stayed there during the weekdays since my grandmother worked double shifts all weekend. Therefore, the campground was sparsely populated Monday to Friday since way more people only have off work and camp for the weekends or holidays. So, there were already eerie vibes there, especially in the dark. And not to mention the ghost stories my dad had told us about the place. The neighbors we did have in the immediate area were very good, despite barely seeing them. They had a full outdoor kitchen that I loved to play pretend chef in, and they left it open for my use whenever I wanted. My grandparents were always very sweet and easygoing, and my nan, in particular, was extremely nurturing to your needs. But they also had moments reminiscent of that movie, The Visit. It was my best friend's first day at the campground when my pop made it a point to tell us to watch out for bears because he had seen one earlier. We brushed that right off since we heard things like this all the time and were having too much fun riding bikes and going into the creek to care. Night soon comes, and it's totally dark. My best friend and I are playing in the outdoor kitchen. Out of nowhere, we hear this low growling and moaning sound, which got much louder as something began tearing at the tarp cover acting as the kitchen wall. We all know that reasoning shuts down, the limbic system overrides, and during threats to survival, the fight/flight response takes over. It seemingly happened in an instant. Before we could even begin to process what was happening, we were running and immediately crying. We ran a couple of feet to our camper to get my nan. I was expecting her to be as comforting as she always was, but her reaction to us was horrifying. She is already laughing wildly and practically slapping her knees. We are very confused and scared. My pop then emerges from behind the camper right next to ours and joins in the mad laughter, eyes bugging out and all. So yeah, my pop pretended to be the bear, which he admitted he never actually saw. So he made that up way earlier in the day just to scare the shit out of us later. We weren't amused, and I don't remember the rest of that week at all, but I do recall still being terrified and finding no relief in their words. I was scared of them and didn't understand why they did it. Still don't. I'm all for pranks and kidding around, but I feel that this was a little beyond that. Mostly because I was so young, and they knew very well about my being very afraid of horror movies in the dark. Everything scared me at that age. They never did anything like that before or after, either. I find it so strange. And they really did get a kick out of us two kids running away crying and screaming. They were holding back tears from laughing so hard. Looking back, I feel it was very disturbing. They never apologized or really paid it much mind for the rest of my friend's stay, but they will laugh heartily when brought up. I'll likely never get any further elaboration from them. Freaky. A couple of years ago, I'm pretty sure my old housemate and I were nearly murder victims. We and a bunch of friends had gone to a beach party that went on all night, and just before first light, me and my friend decided to walk to the lighthouse. To get there, we had to go up a cliff and walk down a secluded road. There was nothing along the way other than a bricked up old bungalow and overgrown wasteland. That's when we saw this guy walking out of the bushes and up the opposite way to us. He came up and stated, talking to us, that everything seemed normal for a minute as he explained he had just been at his allotment. We later found out there were no allotments anywhere near, until he kept trying to get us to enter the bricked up bungalow, and every time we declined, he would become more insistent and his reasons would change. The reasons went from "have you seen inside" to "there's cool artwork inside," a few more mundane reasons. Then we clicked something was really off with this guy. That's when it got weirder. His next reason was, "I grow pot inside, come in and have some." Then he grabs both mine and my friend's wrists tightly, still seeming civil. We think maybe he is just pissed or odd, dropping this translucent plastic carrier bag to the ground with a hefty thud. As we try to get this man to release his grip, his last reason was, "There's 2 dead bodies handcuffed inside, you must see." I'll never forget the look in his eyes as they darted between us as he described the bodies. He was describing us. When I looked down at his bag, I saw the only things in it were a large hammer and a ragged cloth. At that moment, I knew we had to get it out of there, or we were ducked. So I yanked my arm back as hard as I could to get him off me, get between him and my friend, and tell him we have changed our minds and we must get back to the rest of our friends. He hesitatingly lets go of her and questions us about our friends. We walk as fast as we can back the way we came. We didn't run as we didn't know how unstable he was and didn't want to alert him. He picks up his bag and slowly follows us for a while. We get to the top of the road and can see the still lit, distant bonfire. As I look back, he's vanished. No one came up that path after us, but there was also nothing down that path. We never saw him again. I studied in Liverpool a few years ago as a foreign student and stayed in a student apartment. It was a new building built from scratch, and we didn't know anything about the lot prior to living there. Then, one by one, my friends and friends of friends who stayed there started experiencing strange occurrences. I'm pretty sure these people wouldn't lie, as they have nothing to gain from it, and the stories came in a trickle of separate incidents in different units all over the apartment. One friend of mine claimed that there was a little boy in his room who would jump on his bed while he was asleep and strangle him at times. When my friend wasn't home, he would hear sounds coming from his room, like someone was banging on the walls. Then one friend, who was a non-believer in spirits, sensed someone watching him while he was asleep. Being the non-believer he was, he outrightly challenged it, and remarked that if there was anyone present, he should say his name. Well, it did. Or something did. He opened his eyes and saw an apparition of a little boy standing by the heater that was directly across his bed. The boy was just staring at him. I'm not particularly religious, but I am terrified of ghosts, especially ghost children, so I begged my parents to send me a sort of Buddhist protective charm. I hung it on my windowsill and went to sleep. It happened on the very same night. It was about 4 to 5 in the morning, and I was fast asleep. All of a sudden, there was a gush of wind, and the room went absolutely quiet, and eerily cold. Then I heard weeping sounds beside my bed. It sounded like a group of children crying, like they were in a lot of pain. It lasted for a few minutes before the coldness went away and the room became warm again. I always have my heater on, by the way. And as it happened, I tried desperately to move, but it felt like an invincible force was pressing me down. I couldn't even open or blink my eyes. My friend then explained to me that I shouldn't have hung the charm as it hurt spirits when used that way. I apologized to the room, kept the charm in the drawer, and couldn't sleep without lights for a few nights in a row. Later, we found out from a source that the lot used to be an orphanage that got destroyed in a fire. I'm not sure how legit this is, but it certainly explains why everyone saw children as ghosts. I work in a cathedral in the UK. One of the biggest in Northern Europe. The Minster constables have an X-file of weird stuff that they've experienced on the night shift, but this is about personal accounts. I normally help with closing down the museum. It's below the main body of the church, built around the foundations, which were shored up in the 1960s. It's on a Roman floor level. It gets odd down there when there's no one else in. The floors are hollow wood over concrete, and sound tends to carry. Clear footsteps are common, and we have to gently let new staff members know that it happens. I was closing up one weekend in December, and as I walked around the corner of one of the foundations and into the next chamber, I got the impression of walking straight into someone so vividly. I flinched and apologized before my eyes caught up with my brain, and I realized there wasn't anyone there, but I had been hearing footsteps immediately beforehand and in that chamber. It's odd to describe. I've seen shadows in the triforium of the main building, which is an impossibility, as they're locked and alarmed and hoarded off with fireproof boards. Another experience was last month, during a large service attended by various legal officials from around the city, dressed up to the nines in robes and wigs. I was watching from the back and keeping an eye on the doors when I spotted someone wandering on the north side of the nave, to my left, back to me. A short hip-length cloak, some sort of tights or stockings, and a big, broad hat are all I can clearly recall. I assumed it was one of the legal eagles getting themselves separated from their seat, so I walked in their direction right as they walked behind one of the nave pillars. Nobody. He couldn't have gone anywhere else in the time it took me to catch up. Later, I found out another staff member had seen him within 30 seconds of me, going via what point we were at in the service. He was in a small chapel at the east end of the church, almost 150 meters away from me. He had the same thing. The guy left the chapel and went out of sight. By the time my colleague was there was no one. We closed up very quickly that night. The story of how I met the devil. So a few years ago, I was in a pretty bad situation. I had recently moved out of my parents' home and was renting a small cabin in a campground with a friend of mine who sold drugs. He had noticed I had a gift with words and agreed to let me live for free if I agreed to sell his dope, so that was the arrangement. During this period, I saw plenty of ducked up shit. I'd never seen the world of hard drugs so disgusting. One night, after a few cocaine-fueled days without sleep, we had some friends over to the apartment. I go out on the porch to have a cigarette, and a tall stranger approaches me. He was an old man with the most piercing blue eyes. They gave me chills I'll never forget. He tells me that his name is Nemo, which means nobody in Latin, then proceeds to tell me like 5 different life stories that were all about different people, so being very confused, I ask him, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm from everywhere, I'm a fixer, and I can fix any problem you have in your life." He asks me to follow him back to the cabin, and being high on cocaine, I was feeling pretty fearless. He seemed nice enough. We get to the cabin, and he opens the door. The whole one-room cabin is filled floor to ceiling with all kinds of expensive stuff. Jewelry, electronics, and musical equipment, but not the kind an old man would have. He had an Akai MPK DJ controller in there worth thousands, probably a year's worth of rent at this place, the exact one I'd had my eye on for months. Then he pulls out this old slide guitar from the 1920s. He says, "Every person who ever played this guitar left a piece of their soul with it. Can you hear them? Can you hear them singing?" He told me the guitar was there if I wanted it, and the exact moment I was reaching out to take it, My good friend Ben showed up and told me we needed to leave. As we get out of the car, he turns and looks at me and says, "God told me I had to come and see you because the devil had you and was trying to take you." Ben, a very spiritual person, has always warned me before that he felt a demonic presence around me. The next morning, I went to knock on Nemo's door, and there was no answer. I went to the front desk, and they told me the cabin had been vacant for months. Oh yeah, and it was cabin number 6. I saw him, Nemo, one more time when I went to use the community bathroom at the campsite. I looked into the mirror about 3 a.m., and he was standing right behind me. That same night, a girl pointed a revolver at my head. I decided it was best for me to find a new place to live, but some time later I tried to bring my girlfriend back to the campsite. After telling her the story, I could never find it, so she never believed me. I think the creepiest thing that I've ever heard is from my grandpa. Until about the time communism was beginning to end in my country, about 1988, he lived on a farm with grandma. I would say this was maybe 20 kilometers from the city. There was a weird car that kept on just sitting on the road next to their farm that split their property from the neighbors. There were always 2 people in the car, sitting all night long. My grandpa clearly remembered the cigarette smoke flowing from the car on cold days. My grandpa came up to the car one day and recognized by their hats they were SB, and left without bothering them. Anyway, some weird things were happening in that whole area. Animals were stolen once in a while, and the strange car appeared around a time when some drunks were going missing in our area, 3 people. Some people thought they just fell asleep in the snow and got buried. One night he heard creaking downstairs. When he went down, no one was there, but the door was open, and you could see wet tracks through the kitchen. Apparently the weird thing was that they had a chain on that door, and it was open without breaking. A few weeks later, during the night again, my grandparents heard gunshots coming from the next farm over, followed by a bunch of SB, communist secret police, cars. After that, the weird car stopped showing up, and apparently the farm next to my grandparents was home to some small cult that was suspected of using people for weird sacrifices and experiments. This info he got from a friend who worked in the police. They found a small weapons cache and some remains in one of the barns that were dismembered in a peculiar fashion. Not sure what that meant really. My grandpa is still thinking that the night someone came into the house, it was one of the SBs making sure nothing weird was inside or one of the creepy cultists trying to find another victim. They sold the farm 2 years later and never looked back. My best friend's mother, we'll call her Sarah, was a very down-to-earth, logical lady. I didn't believe in ghosts, the paranormal, or anything like that. She's a smart woman, who worked in the medical field, and she's the last person I'd expect to go around making up stories to scare kids. My best friend was hanging out at our house because his mom had an appointment a couple towns over. It was just starting to hit night when Sarah called my mother, saying she would be a bit late and that she had picked up a girl who was abandoned on a back road. This teenage girl supposedly lived in the next town over, and her boyfriend kicked her out of his car after she refused to have sex with him after his homecoming dance. The only problem was that it was after 9 p.m., and she was out in the middle of a back road with little traffic and no telephones and would be 3 to 4 hours walk from her house. So Sarah, being the lovely lady that she is, picked her up. My mom says, "No problem," and she kept us entertained. Until the point that Sarah shows up at our house crying and half panicking. She drove the girl to the address she gave but refused to get out of the car when they got there, saying her dad would be so mad at her. Her dad doesn't like her boyfriend. Well, Sarah gets out and goes to have a word with dad. She thought this poor girl had a terrible enough night as it was. Well, the man at the door was visibly agitated, but for entirely different reasons. His daughter had been killed 3 years before, when she had been dumped by her boyfriend on that back road and struck by a car. Sarah thought it was some kid playing a nasty prank and went to pull the kid out of the car, only to find there was nobody there. Of course, by the time she got to our house, she was a wreck. She doesn't like to talk about the incident and is still skeptical of ghosts, but she says there's no other explanation for why she knew what a dead girl looked like, what she was wearing, where exactly on the road she was, and that her boyfriend left her there. I rented a cabin for a week with my so. The first night there, we spent the day visiting her family, the actual reason for our trip, had dinner, and she got pretty wasted. Get back to the cabin, carry my so inside, and find all our bags opened or dumped on the floor. This put me in panic mode. I hadn't been drinking, and I routinely carry it, so I pulled out my gun and swept the house. I check every room, closet, even under the bed, nothing. My so is still fast asleep, so I check our stuff over, and there's nothing missing. It had just been dumped onto the floor. So I look around some more, all the windows are locked, and the back door is even dead bolted. It just really bothered me that there was no sign of a break-in. I know I locked the place before I left, so either someone else had a key to my cabin or whoever it was still inside the cabin. Either way, I didn't think I'd do much sleeping. It was too late to make other arrangements, and considering that most likely there wasn't anything to worry about. We had been gone all day, from 9 a.m. to midnight. So odds, whoever it was probably way earlier. But still, I couldn't shake it. I went in and covered up my used the bathroom, set up a rocking chair facing the front door, and with my hand back inside, look in the far corner of the living room, and I see the corner of the main living room rug lifted up. I investigated, it's covering the opening to the crawl space. That means this guy was in my cabin the entire time. I must have pulled up and caught the guy in the act, he thought fast and hid in the crawl space. Then sometime during the night, I crawled out, disarmed myself, and walked right out the front door. Okay, well, this didn't happen to me directly, but it's something that affected me very, very deeply. When I was about 7 years old, my elder sister, cousin, had come to live at our house since it was closer to her university than her hometown. Since our house was quite small at the time, she was forced to sleep out on the rollout couch in the living room. This was during the peak of summer in India, and I'm not sure if you know how hot Indian summers can get. This was the late 90s, and economic reform was still happening, so we didn't really have an AC, a cooler, or anything else, which basically meant my sister couldn't sleep well. She started staying up later and later, until she just drifted off to sleep when she became too tired. One night, she wakes up from a deep sleep, rubs her eyes, and sees this old lady on the rocking chair in front of the couch, rocking away nonchalantly. She rubbed her eyes a few times, but the lady was still there. Thinking she could have been the landlord's mother, they lived in the house above ours, she slept off, feeling uneasy about the whole thing but not quite scared shitless, yet. The next day, she asked my parents who the old lady was, and they just gave her a blank look, thinking she must have been dreaming. A few days later, the topic came up during a conversation with the landlords, and my sister once again gave the description of the old lady. The landlords froze and just stared at her. They asked her to repeat the description. She did. It turns out the old lady was their mother, and she'd died in that exact same rocking chair just a few months before we'd moved into the house. But it doesn't end there. Up until this point, I wasn't privy to all these goings-on. A little while later, my father left the country for work and returned a couple of months later. So it was only me, my mom, and my sister in the house. Being a kid, I used to sleep in my mom's room at the time, while my sister moved into what used to be my room. My mom can't fall asleep without reading, you see, she's had this habit for ages. Now the structure of the room was simple, a door in the northwest corner, a big glazed glass window on the east side, and a bathroom door on the north side. The bed was in the center of the room. One night, my mom frantically wakes me up, urging me not to make a sound, and she's pointing out something towards the window. I open my eyes slowly and can barely stifle a scream. There's a silhouette framed against the glazed window, and it's just standing there, moving slightly on the spot, but it's undoubtedly human. The veranda outside Mom's room was small, rectangle-shaped, and surrounded by a solid brick wall, about 8 to 10 feet high. Still not making a sound, my mom reached to turn off the bedside lamp with her hand over my mouth so I wouldn't say a word. She whispered to me to close my eyes and just concentrate on sleeping. Thankfully, there was no way to enter the room from the window, and the bedroom door was locked. The next night, it happened again, and by this time, Mom had abandoned the notion that it was a one-off thing. She immediately called the community's security guard, who decided to stake out the place the next night to catch the intruder and identify him. He hid behind one of the water tanks in the veranda. Small communities in India are structured like that, with their water source either on top of the house or attached to a backyard or veranda, and staked out the place. The clock kept ticking. My mom kept the lamp on, and I was wide awake, petrified, but she told me not to make a sound and to pretend like everything was normal, just in case movement or sound made the intruder do something violent. Not surprisingly, we soon saw the silhouette against the window again, and I could barely keep myself from pissing myself. I was that scared. Several minutes later, after Mom realized the security guard hadn't acted yet, she turned off the lamp and waited. About 15 minutes later, he appeared at our front door, white as a skeleton. He couldn't articulate himself, but he spat out the words soon enough. It turns out the intruder was my sister, who was climbing over the wall and standing outside our window, as still as she could be, and would do nothing but mouth silent words and pull indescribable faces. I remember shivering when I heard these words, and I heard my mother crying. We moved in with our landlords that night after calling my cousin's parents to take her away. I was a chaperone for a Girl Scout camping trip when I was 16. The kids were about 5 to 9 years old. I had a cabin with 6 kids I was in charge of at night and helped out during the day. On night one of my kids had a bit of a developmental issue. I wake up to her leaving the cabin. I chase after her, thinking she is going to the latrine, but she's sleepwalking. I'm out in the dark, barefoot, trying to coax this creepy kid back inside when I hear something big out in the woods. I grab the kid, and she starts screaming like an infant and goes stiff. I carry her back inside. Everyone in my cabin is awake, and I don't sleep the rest of the night. Day 2, the sleepwalker is moved to another cabin. That afternoon, when I'm walking the kids back from the latrine, a sleepwalker and another kid sneak away from the group. I realize they are gone, get help, find kids 15 minutes later. Back at camp, they start telling scary stories about their sneaking away, saying it was the kitty cow who lives in the woods. Night 2, wake up, and it's gotten cold. Get up to close the windows and shutters and see a light in the woods, like someone has a lantern. It walks to a point in the woods, then stops. I stay still in the dark and watch it for a long while, about to shrug it off when the light moves again, coming around and going down the side of the cabin, closer but not close enough to see who is carrying it. I realize it's heading to the window by the kids' bunk beds. Sneak over and close the window and shutters. The light stays close on the other side of the shutters for a long time before moving on and disappearing. Day 3, tell adults about light. They dismiss it as probably a ranger checking the campsite. Kids by this time are totally freaking each other out over kitty cow. I'm literally starting to be afraid to leave the craft area in broad daylight because kitty cow might be there. There's all sorts of weird kitty cow stories. That afternoon, we find out a bear broke into another camp and ate food, so in addition to a real threat, we think that may be the origin of kitty cow. Plus, it would make sense that there would be rangers out looking, as there's a bear on the loose. Night 3, I stay up listening to music to see if the lights will come back. At about 1 a.m., I see it coming by again, walking to a point in the woods and waiting. Around 1:30, it starts closer to the cabin. As it walks around the side, I hear one of the other chaperones start to yell, "Hey, who is that? Who's out there?" The light cuts off. I yell back to the chaperone that I saw it too. What should we do? I'm terrified at this point. The chaperone tells me to bring my kids over to her, holding hands. We all cram in one cabin, and a bit later, a thunderstorm starts. For another night, I basically don't sleep. The next day everyone sort of laughs it off again, sort of saying we weren't seeing anything, that maybe it was heat lightning or the kids were playing with flashlights and we saw them reflected. I'm so sleep deprived, it hurts, and I'm hearing popping noises. I end up being paired with another chaperone, and we go for a hike with the kids. It's all foggy in the woods, and the kids are really strung out between the excitement the night before, which they blame on kitty cow. Out in the woods, the kids start claiming they are seeing kitty cow everywhere, sneaking up on us. I can't tell you now how weird and terrifying things got then. You had this Silent Hill fog, all the girls were wearing matching ponchos, so the scene was surreal. The kids are freaking out over every tree, screaming kitty cow is coming to get them, and I'm barely held together on no sleep, convinced myself that some weirdo has been creeping around our camp. Things literally devolve into mass hysteria. The kids are literally falling to the ground, screaming and sobbing, and the other chaperone leaves. She just books it out of the forest and back to camp while I'm coaxing, pulling, and carrying screaming children out of the mist. I got the kids almost back to camp when the other chaperones came rushing out. The chaperone who left claimed she saw a bear and ran for her life. I didn't leave any kids behind. I have never and will never experience anything as creepy and terrifying as that afternoon in the woods. While nothing happened, it has haunted my dreams since then. Years ago, at me and my now partner's house in Chicago, I experienced something that I've never been able to explain. My partner was on a backpacking trip to South America, had been gone for over a month, and was still a couple months away from returning. We usually rent out the extra bedrooms in the house, but less than a month before he was leaving for the trip, the 2 roommates upstairs had moved out, and we decided to leave them empty while he was out of town instead of trying to find more roommates on short notice and also use the time to update the paint, pull the carpeting, and refinish the wood floors underneath. Anyways, I had come home from work about 8 p.m. and decided I was going to take a shower, get dressed up a little, and go out to the bars to meet up with some friends as it was a Friday evening and I didn't have to work the next day. I take my shower, head into my bedroom, and start pulling on my clothes. My bedroom is on the garden level, which is like a walkout half-basement common in Chicago bungalows, and my bed is up against the wall under the concrete steps that lead to the front door, which has a heavy wooden door and a very particular sounding Jimmy-proof deadbolt lock on it. I had been living there for 5 years, and I was very familiar with the sounds of roommates coming and going through the door that was just above my bed. Anyways, I had just finished pulling on my underwear and stood up and was putting on my shirt, and I heard footsteps on the concrete stoop and then the extremely unmistakable sound of the deadbolt turning. I instantly freeze so I can hear better, thinking I'm out of my mind because I'm the only one living there at the moment, but I can definitely hear the door open and hear footsteps hit the wood floor in the entryway. So now I'm grabbing my aluminum softball bat I keep next to my bed and tiptoeing towards the stairs that go up to the main level, and I'm most definitely hearing footsteps crossing the same way right above me. As I get to the bottom of the stairs, I stop and I'm listening as hard as I can, and I hear definite footsteps heading right towards the top of the stairs. I decide, duck it, and rush up the stairs in a second with my bat ready and nothing. There's nobody there. I turn on all the lights and check all the rooms, windows, and doors, and everything is locked and bolted. If someone had actually been there, it would have been impossible for them to exit the house before I could catch them and lock the door behind them. The creepiest part was that we had literally changed the locks a week before my partner left, and I knew the only other key that could open the doors was hiking through South America at the time. Needless to say, I went and crashed with a friend after the bars that night, and I went home the next day. I used to babysit at this really nice house that was about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. About 15 of those miles were on random gravel roads, so it was pretty isolated. A well-known billionaire in the community built the house when he started making his money. He was a really tough guy who basically put his business before his wife and family. Later on in life, as his health was declining, he began to regret that. It was too late, though, as he had burned bridges with most of his children. I only know this because my dad employed his mentally challenged daughter and became close with his wife. Anyway, he died, and I sht you not, he was haunting the house he built. I was at this house at least a couple times a week, and really freaky stuff started happening as soon as he died. The dog, who was normally pretty chill, refused to come inside for weeks and would just run around the house in a panic. He'd stand outside the window of an empty room and just bark and growl like crazy. The 2-year-old started saying that he was scared all the time and would get up in the middle of the night to check on his baby brother. He had never done that before. There were 2 things that really scared me, though. It was really late, probably 2 a.m., and the phone started ringing, but not in the normal way. It was like a constant ring instead of a ring, and then a pause. When I tried to answer it, there was just this clicking noise, and as soon as I'd hang up, they'd all start ringing again. The screen on the phone didn't change either. It didn't register that there was an incoming call at all. It just kept displaying the time and number of missed calls. I had to go and manually turn the ringer volume off on each phone so it wouldn't wake the boys up. The second was that I heard something in the main living room and assumed that the older boy had woken up. As I was getting up to go check, I heard a crash, and when I got there, a tall vase holding some fake plants was on the ground, and there was no one in the room. The boys were both in bed, and the dog was asleep in the garage. I know it kind of sounds ridiculous, but these things really happened. Even if they didn't, though, the way I felt when I was in the house would have convinced me that it was haunted. I have never felt so on edge in my life. It's like I couldn't relax. I finally started having either my boyfriend or my male best friend come with me. They both felt the same way about it too. Anyway, that's the creepiest thing that's happened to me, and that's why I totally believe in ghosts now. A shadow person, sometime around 1995. At the time, my late wife and I were living in a double-wide mobile home that we had purchased new that was sitting on a spot that has never had a house of any kind and is at least 1,000 feet from where any house is or has ever been, to the best of my knowledge. In light of this, you would not think that our house would be a likely location for a haunting. However, my wife and I have on occasion seen several rather strange occurrences there, the most startling of which I will relate here. This event took place one night after my wife and I had retired for the evening. Normally at night, my wife and I leave a light on all night in the bathroom farthest from our bedroom because there are usually children in the house. That bathroom is just outside the children's bedrooms and would provide them with a nightlight. However, on that night, all the children were staying somewhere else, and there was no one in the house except my wife and me. As was usual, though, we left the light in the bathroom on out of habit, and it cast a faint glow through our open bedroom door, weakly lighting the room. Some time had passed after we had laid down, and I was unable to sleep. I assumed, though, that my wife was asleep because her breathing had become regular and reached a point at which it sounded like she was asleep. While lying there, unable to sleep, I began to become aware of a presence that I could not explain other than to say I knew we were not alone. I was laying there trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination when suddenly and silently a figure moved in through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed in a smooth, gliding motion. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, we took up a fixed position at the foot of our bed. Strangely, I seemed to be acutely aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us while I was lying there watching it. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these but less material than a real person. The strangest thing about this whole situation was my complete lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware that some being had entered our room and there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not of this earth, at least not as we perceive it, it did not seem to arouse any fear response in me. I would say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepy and curiosity, especially considering the fact that I was sure it was aware of me as I was of it. After some time, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining it due to my drowsy condition and the dim light. Suddenly, I realized that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep. Her breathing had become almost silent. Speaking in a calm voice, I said, "Honey, are you awake?" To which she answered yes. Then I added, "Do you see anything?" I was expecting her reply to be, "What do you mean?" But instead, much to my surprise, she said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" When she said this, I did finally become somewhat nervous, and we both then began to pray. We lay there for about 10 minutes, softly saying prayers, and then it was gone. But it didn't just disappear. Over a period of about 20 seconds, it became less solid, like smoke clearing, and our perception of its presence became weaker and weaker until it just wasn't there anymore. Then it was as if it had never been there. Nothing like this has ever happened since, and the only evidence that it ever did is my memory of it. Once, as a teenager, I was leaving a fast food drive-thru, and someone in an old Bronco started to follow me. At first, I thought it was a road rage situation and did the sorry wave and tried to let him pass, but he swerved at me like he was trying to hit my car. He pulled up alongside me and was screaming out the window, just incoherently furious, continuing to swerve at me. This was before the days of cell phones, and I was in an unfamiliar area of town. I was driving a Firebird and tried to outrun him, but he would run red lights and make crazy turns to keep up with me. I eventually ran into a dead end, and he pulled his truck across the road to block it. There were big ditches on either side, so I was stuck. He got out and started scrambling at my door handle, doors locked, and pounding on the windows, his face inches from mine, just screaming in a way that seemed like he couldn't even quite see me. Shaking and crying, I turned on my overhead light so he could see I was just a teenage girl and not who he was looking for, and he jumped on my hood and started pounding, and drooling in thick, white smears, on my windshield. I was screaming and crying, and he stopped, held up one finger like wait a minute, and scurried off to his truck. I floored the gas and ran into the ditch and drove like a crazy person for 45 minutes until I knew I had lost him. I had no idea what his deal was. My mom thought I made up this entire story to lie about the damage to my car, and she still seems hesitant to believe me. I used to live on an old southern plantation turned horse farm. It was over 1,000 acres, mostly woods or pastures. One day I was walking/exploring with my dogs down one of the horse trails in the woods about 20 minutes away from the house and decided to randomly go off trail. Like a 90-degree turn, climbing down into a spring, then up under an ancient barbed wire fence, and wandering along for a while until I found two large limestone caves directly across from each other. Both entrances were blocked by a bunch of rocks haphazardly stacked on top of each other. But they weren't entirely blocked. I really wanted to go inside, but common sense told me I didn't have a phone, nobody knew where the duck I was, what if a snake bit me or I broke a leg on the rocks, etc. So I just looked around the caves and found this awesome as duck old knife that looked like someone had carved it from a deer horn. As soon as I picked up the knife, it was like the wood had changed. If you've ever lived out in the country for a long time in the same place, you get a feel for it. My dogs got closer and clung to me. I felt distinctly unwelcome. I put down the knife, but that horrible feeling kept up until I was totally out of the woods and almost home again. I never felt comfortable alone in those woods after that. It was like one moment I'm happy and exploring, and the next I'm being watched by someone who very much hates my guts. I'm sure it could be explained as nerves or whatever, but I looked for the caves later but never found them, despite knowing exactly where I left the trail. I know that feeling of connection with the land. I used to be able to wake up and go outside and know immediately if something was wrong, a sick horse, a loose horse, people hunting on our land, etc. There is nothing I can explain, just a feeling. Whatever I felt when I picked up that knife, it was really hostile. That's probably my most unexplained experience. A few years ago, I was woken up by someone lightly poking me in the forehead at 5 a.m. I woke up thinking it was my roommate, but when my eyes started to adapt to the darkness, I saw a 2-meter man standing next to my bed. He immediately threw himself to the floor and covered his face. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't even scream as I was completely shocked. While I was thinking of what to use as a weapon, he got up and started running out of the apartment, and for some reason I jumped out right behind him. I don't know why I did, to be honest, and only then did I start screaming for help. He eventually made it out of the apartment and started going down the stairs. I gained some sense and realized I probably shouldn't be following this huge, tall, unknown man, so I ran back to my apartment. One of my roommates was ready to go follow him, bat in hand and all, but we decided it'd be better to just call the police. We never found out who he was or why he was there, and nothing was stolen or taken. It took me a long time to make it through the night calmly again, and even more to feel comfortable at that apartment, especially by myself. So in my early teens, me and some friends discovered the Ouija board and wanted to try it. One day, one of the friends called me and said to come outside so we could play. So I grabbed a paper, pen, and coin and went out of the house to meet them. What I didn't expect was that we were going to play at about 10 p.m. near a giant stone cross from one of the neighborhoods around. We got there by that time, and we started playing, just the two of us, no cars, no people, only a few dogs and birds, and a church behind where I was sitting. We kept asking stupid questions till we got the name Zozo. Then we asked who he would be haunting out of the two of us. Right in that moment, my friend gets up and starts sprinting in the middle of the street, wanting to get home as fast as possible. Being scared of staying alone in such a creepy place, I started running after him. When I caught up with him, I asked, "What's going on?" At which he replied, it was looking at me from behind the church's fence while almost crying and panting from our little marathon. Nothing happened until I woke up about 2 days later and noticed 3 pretty deep marks on my arm. I didn't own any pets at the time, and some more light marks on my chest and back. I was pretty scared at the time, but I don't mind the scratches too much today. I don't really have one for myself, but I do have one that happened to my dad when he was still in college. I don't recall some of the minor details, but I will try my best. My dad and a bunch of other people were going to some sort of swim meet as chaperones for a group of kids, and they were waiting for their bus to pick them up. Dad's minding his own business, watching the children mess around, and whatnot, when he hears someone calling his name. He looks across the road, and there's an old man standing there. The man isn't that unusual looking. He has a long, white beard and plain attire, just a regular old fellow. But he has an intense stare, directly at my dad. The man starts walking across the road towards my dad, not even noticing the other people. And, according to Dad, no one else saw him, either. Some of the kids were playing tag and ran right by him without noticing. At this point, my dad is scared, and the old man eventually stops right in front of him. He stares directly into my dad's eyes and says, absolutely seriously, "Be careful on that bus." After that, he just walks away. At that moment, the bus arrives to pick up my dad's group, so they all get on and drive off. A few minutes into the trip, the bus is driving along the side of a cliff, and the driver loses control. The guardrails couldn't hold, and the bus starts to nosedive off the ledge but is actually stopped by a ducking tree root jutting out the side of the cliff wall. The other chaperones force open the back doors of the bus and successfully herd all of the kids out to safety before evacuating themselves. The scary part? My dad was the last person to get out of that bus, mere seconds before the tree root snapped and sent the whole vehicle plummeting down the cliff. He never saw that mysterious old man again, but he still gets chills down his spine thinking about him. It was 2001, and my friend and I were 17, both female, and driving back from a late movie to my house one night. I lived in a pretty rural area in Maine, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. As we were driving down the highway through the woods, we passed a median with a car sitting in it, facing in the oncoming direction, with all its lights off. Right after we drove past it, it flashed its lights, did a 3-point turn, and started driving behind us. We giggled, "Oh, it must be a gang initiation. We're going to get murdered." Because this was Maine and that was obviously not what was happening. The turnoff for my road was a few miles away, and this car stayed behind us the whole time. We made the left turn, and the car kept going down the highway. Phew. But 30 seconds later, we realized that the car must have backed up on the highway and made the turn after us. Now we were getting a little worried. There was still one more road to turn down before we got to my house. This is way in the woods, and the car did the same thing, backed up and made the left after us. Now we were legit freaks. I had a long driveway, and the car followed us right into the driveway and almost up to my house, which had all the lights on because my mom was home. We ran into my house, just in time to see the mystery car reverse back down the driveway and drive away. To this day, we still have no idea why that car was following us, if they thought we were someone else or if they actually had bad intentions and only changed their mind when they saw that my house lights were on. Since we only ever saw the front of the car, we didn't get a license plate or a better description than a blue car. I was in the Navy from 1999 to 2005, and during my enlistment, I was stationed on one of the Channel Islands off the coast of California, San Clemente Island. I was an electronics technician, and my job was to maintain some of the radar equipment on the island. San Clemente, at that time, hosted about 300 military and government personnel. There were no civilians on this island who did not work for the government in some fashion. This island is about 27 miles long, and at the very northern end is an airfield that was used for our flights as well as a training field for new aircraft pilots. Many of us work at the airfield, but there is no housing there. All of the housing is down a road to the south, about 2.5 to 3 miles near the waterfront pier area. There are a limited number of phone lines on the island, so most of us do not have phones in our rooms, and at that time there was no cell phone coverage on the island, not sure if there is now. In order for any of us to call friends or family in the evening, we had to go into what we referred to as the commons, which had a total of 4 phones. Everyone was trying to use these phones at the same time, so at best, you could get a 15-minute phone call into someone without any privacy whatsoever. It was a pain in the ass. However, I was a second-class petty officer at the time and was the supervisor of my work center. I had a desk in one of the trailers. Trailers are gone now and have been replaced by a new air traffic control building, with my own private phone, and one of the vehicles we drove around on the island was at my disposal. Therefore, instead of dealing with having to wait for one of those 4 phones, I would simply make the drive back to the airfield every evening, where my girlfriend would call my desk number promptly at 8 p.m. I did this many times, more than I can remember. Sometimes the airfield would be open at night for night operations, and other times it would be closed. When it was closed, I was the only person down there at the airfield, which was always dark, no street lights and very few building lights. The trailers we worked in were about a 50 by 12 rectangle with 2 entrances, one on either end. There was only one light switch in the entire building, and it was on the far end from where I would park. My nightly routine was to park the truck that I drove by the closer door, leave the headlights on, and prop open the door with the headlights of the truck shining down into the building so I could make my way to the side with the light switch without tripping over anything in the dark. I would then flip the lights on and make my way back, turning off the headlights once I had established light in the building. On occasion, there would be someone else down there at the airfield in another building when I did this, even when the airfield was closed. However, I would always know who it was because there would always be a vehicle down there. No one got to the airfield by walking, especially at night. There was really no point, and the walk was long. On this particular night, I arrived at the airfield alone. It was closed, and I saw no other vehicles. There were no lights on in any other trailers or buildings. I did my normal routine where I left the lights on in the truck, propped open the door, and started to head down towards the light switch. When I was just a few steps away from the light switch, I heard footsteps in the gravel behind me, outside of the door. I turned and glanced over my shoulder, and what I saw was the dark silhouette of a huge person standing in the doorway. I am talking freaking huge. It was shaped like a man, but his shoulders were up just below the top of the doorframe, and I could not see the top of this person's head. Like I said, it was a silhouette, and I could not make out any features. Yeah, it freaked me out a bit, and I turned back to the light switch quickly and took 2 more hastened steps to flip the switch on. As soon as I turned back towards the door where the figure was with the lights on, I turned and saw nothing. Absolutely nothing. I walked back to the door where the truck was, somewhat expecting that this was some kind of joke being played on me because lots of guys I worked with knew about my evening drives down to the airfield. I looked out the door, and no one was there. I walked around the side of the building in both directions and saw nothing, no one. I was still alone. I was shaken a bit and was trying to come to grips with what I just saw and make some sense of it when the phone rang. It was 8 o'clock, and my girlfriend was calling me. I quickly shut the truck off and went back to my desk, which was just in front of the door near where I parked. I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, babe." The voice that answered me was not my girlfriend's, it was a man's voice, and it said, "Hey, babe." "Who is this?" I asked. "Who is this?" it replied. It was then that I figured out that it was my own voice that just repeated exactly what I said. "What the F?" I said. I was probably a bit hysterical at this point. "What the F?" My voice spoke right back to me. Just then, I heard a loud crash behind me, like something large had just been dropped in the back of the truck. I slammed the phone down and sort of hid behind the doorframe. As I peered out the door I still had propped open. I saw nothing. Still effing nothing. The phone starts to ring again, and here I am all freaked out, staring between the phone and the truck while trying to figure out if I really want to answer it again, and also debating with myself if I want to turn my back on that open doorway to the outside where the figure and the crash were. I decide to answer the phone and pick it up. Reluctantly, I say, "Hello?" My girlfriend answers. I am not quite sure what I said at that point, but she could tell that I was freaking out. I was. I didn't go into detail about what had just happened, but I told her that I would call her back. I shut that door and got out of there as quickly as I could. I went back to the commons and waited in line to call her back. I also left those lights on all night long, and the next day I got reprimanded by security for having done so because they found the building unlocked with the lights on later that night. I didn't tell them what happened, because honestly, who would have believed that? When I was younger, I would share a bedroom with my older sister and brother. My bed was in the middle of the room, but the beds were on the opposite side of the room, against the walls. I went to bed one night and woke up after a dream. A dream's not important. It was still dark, and I tried to turn to my right. I discovered that I couldn't move, so I tried turning to my left, only to realize again that I couldn't move. No matter which side I tried to turn, I was unable to move. I then tried to sit up in bed, but I couldn't seem to. No matter what I did, I was unable to move. Eventually, I started screaming for help and kicking. The scariest thing was that when I was kicking, I didn't feel my feet hitting my soft bed, but what felt like a hard floor. Eventually, my kicking and screaming woke my brother up. When he went and turned on the bedroom light, I was shocked to see that I was no longer lying in bed but instead was somehow trapped underneath my brother's bed. My head was somehow trapped between the metal frame of my brother's bed and the wall, which explains why I couldn't move. My brother asked how I got under his bed. He asked me how I got there. Seriously, I'm trapped under his bed, and he wants to know how it happened. I screamed, "I don't know," and to get me out. He tried to lift his bed up but couldn't do it. He finally went to our parents' room, and my mom came in, and she was able to lift the bed up enough for me to get out. As I did, they asked how I got a mark on my face. I'm supposed to see a mark on my face. I said I didn't know and crawled back into bed. Fortunately, that was the only time it happened. And before anyone says it, no, I'm not a sleepwalker, and I was only about 6 or 7 when this happened, so there's no way I would have had the strength to do it myself. This happened around 3 years ago. I was living with a roomie and going to school, and I was around 22, I'm a female. It was a weekday evening, and my roommate had informed me that she was going out clubbing and staying over at another friend's house. She had invited me, but I didn't really feel like going. Instead, I made plans to sit on my ass, watch junk TV, and work on homework. Around 10 p.m., I went to the gas station to get some candy and energy drinks. I remember that day pretty well, because I had gotten out of classes pretty early and had just gotten my hair done, and I was feeling pretty confident and cute. I went into the gas station, and there were 3, probably in their 20s, guys just lurking around. They just looked like your average frat boys, and I remember that one had shaggy blonde hair and was covered in tattoos. I noticed one of them nudge the other and nod in my direction as I picked out my snacks, but I didn't pay much mind. They paid before I did, and I left. After I got my stuff, I walked out to the parking lot and saw them sitting in a beat-up, shitty car, and all 3 of them seemed to be staring at me. I hopped in my car and headed back to my house, which was literally only a few minutes from the gas station, and they started their car and followed. I didn't think much of it, figuring they were probably just heading in the same direction as I was. However, I lived pretty deep in a subdivision with a lot of turns, and after a minute of pulling in and making several turns, I noticed they seemed to be following me. I got nervous since I knew I was home alone, so I kept driving past my house. I pulled out of the neighborhood and back onto the main road, and they were still following. I just drove for a while, and they sped up and really started getting close. Then they started flashing their lights and actually pulled up next to me and rolled their window down. The part of me that has faith in humanity thought, what the duck? Do I have a low tire or something? But when I looked over and saw them leering at me, I knew it wasn't anything like that, and I immediately began to panic a little. We were on a more deserted stretch of road now, and they were swerving almost like they were going to bang into my car, but I just sped up. All I could think was, should I drive to the police station? It's like 15 minutes away from here, and there's a ton of stoplights on the way. What if I have to stop and they block my car or something? Fortunately, by this point, I was getting somewhat close to my sister's house. She lives pretty close to me, about 15 minutes away, but in the opposite direction of the police station. My hands were shaking, And I was trying to navigate the road with these douche nozzles speeding up and slowing down and trying to nudge me off the road, but I picked up my phone and dialed my sister. She answered on the fourth ring. Without preamble, I immediately asked her if Josh, her husband, was home. She sounded confused, but said yeah. Josh is in the military, and I knew he owned guns. He's a good guy, but we didn't really talk much, and I never felt particularly close to him or anything. Tell him to get his gun and come out to the driveway, please. By this point, I was near tears. I dropped the phone, and one of those ducks threw something, I think a plastic Coke bottle, at my driver's side window when they sped up near me. I finally saw my sister's house and pulled into her driveway. The entire house was dark. No porch light. Nothing. I was so ducked. I misheard her. They weren't even home, and there aren't any neighbors that would be close enough to run to. The guys pulled up behind me so I couldn't back out of the driveway, and they all jumped out. They all started walking up to my car, and one of them even reached for the handle and yanked on it. By this point, I was fumbling for my phone again. Duck, duck. Do I have a weapon in here? Should I grab my phone and try to run? Should I back over these bastards or just stay locked in the car? In the split second that I looked up, two things happened. First, I made eye contact with the shaggy-haired blonde guy, who was the one yanking on my door. He didn't look angry, drunk, or anything. His eyes were dead and predatory. While I was frozen in terror, he looked cold, like he had done this kind of thing before or something. The other guys were trying on my other doors, but I couldn't break eye contact with the blonde, who was inches from my face and only separated by a glass window. Second, I finally saw a shape move behind him in the darkness, and I heard a loud bang. All the guys stopped and looked, and my hero, my brother-in-law, stepped out of the shadows, creeping up from behind the house. He pointed his gun at them and told them to get the duck out of there. They ran back to their car and sped off, screaming profanities at Josh and me. When they left, my sister ran outside and brought me in. The driveway scene sounds in writing like it took a long time, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. Because of that, and because of how dark it was, we didn't get the guy's plate number. We called the police, and they came out to get our statements. They said they would have someone patrol the area to keep an eye out for any cars that were the same make, model, or color, but that it would be hard to catch the guys without the license plate number. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. They never caught those assholes. I can only wonder what they wanted with me, what they were planning for me, or what would have happened if Josh hadn't been there. This was when I was 2 to 3 years old, but for some reason I always vaguely remember it to this day. I am 26 now. My dad played a part in this as well. We moved to the Netherlands in 1995 as refugees from the Slavic/Bosnian Civil War. I was 1 year old. This happened somewhere in 1997. The reason I say this is just to make it clear that there is still a huge language barrier. My parents and I went to see some friends of theirs in another city. We had never been there, so we were taking a walk in the city center around the shopping areas. At some point, I was just missing everyone, and I don't exactly remember if I just wandered off or if someone took me. I just remember being in an alley and my dad coming around the corner, all worried. I remember being in a lot of fear and stress until I saw my dad. There was a conversation between him and someone before I left with him. Until recently, I didn't think much of it. My dad told me that when he saw me, there were two ladies holding me, telling my dad I was their kid and he should stop harassing them. They were telling him that he was lying and that I belonged to their family or whatever. He didn't understand the language that well yet and was very shocked. I can't imagine how confusing that was for him. Coming from a war where he had friends and family murdered, though, he was not the type to be ducked with. I just wonder sometimes what their intentions are. It creeps me out. I feel odd telling this story, being a 40-year-old man now with 2 children of my own, whom I tell all the time there is no such thing as ghosts, knowing in the back of my mind that this is not actually true. Recent events have forced me to move from Texas back to Florida. This is the place I lived as a child and where my parents still reside. After so many years that have passed since that night, the one that started events that changed the rest of my life, I decided that I wanted answers to questions that were still stirring. Like closure when something traumatic takes place in life. One day, as I visited my parents, it came out. I asked my father if he remembered that night, the one that I still fear to this day. My dad, who is now 70, has undergone recent brain surgery due to a hereditary condition. He has had memory loss, but not about that night. He quickly stopped smiling and looked back at me with a strange look in his eyes. Before we could go into the details, the subject was abruptly changed by my mom, but it gave me confirmation that something bad happened that night. As long as I can remember, during my entire childhood, we were a church-going family. Mom and Dad were not always this way. They liked to party, drink, get high, and do things that they did back in the 70s that we're all hear about today. Things happened in life that caused them to make life-changing decisions. The night this event took place was a Sunday night. I remember this because we had come home from a late-night evening service. I am not sure why most went to church, but I liked it because I would see my friends, and there was a girl I had a crush on, not that I ever told her. When we got home, I went directly inside, changed into my pajamas, brushed my teeth, and went directly to bed, just like every Sunday night. The layout of my room was as follows: as soon as you walked through the door, my bed was directly to the right, and on the other side of the bed was a window covered by a darker curtain. On the wall opposite my bed, there were 2 windows sitting on the left and right, also covered by dark curtains, with my dresser and attached mirror in between the windows. On the wall to the left of my bed, there was a very small closet. At night, my room was streaking, leaving part of himself behind. But I said nothing, turning back to the ceiling and then closing my eyes. I did not keep them closed for long. I was not tired, so I opened my eyes. As they focused, I saw something in the front dresser. It looked a bit odd. It was dark. My dad had turned off the hall light after leaving my room, but even in the dark, my eyes adjusted, allowing me to see the shape of something standing there. Or so I thought. I kept looking, trying to continue to focus, and then it shifted. I panicked, and then I knew something was really there, not just my eyes playing tricks on me. I will not lie, that is the moment in my life when I learned what I do in the moment, and I chose flight, screaming like something out of a horror movie, and ran out of my room, but I realized that the running was only in my mind and I was still in bed. I was so terrified and could not move. It seemed like an eternity, but it was less than a minute before my dad ran into my room. He had flipped on the hall light right before he entered, and I swear I saw something scurry quickly out of the light into my closet. I do not know how tall it really was, but I said that it was a 6-foot-tall shadowy figure as I tried to explain to the dad. He told me that this is just in my imagination, and I need to stop scaring myself and get some sleep. In my dad's defense, I was a storyteller at age 11. And at that moment, that beloved story about the boy who cried wolf became my unsettling reality. He turned and started to leave my room, and it happened again, the feeling, the blur, the light going off. I was terrified. I knew it was there. I did not want to look, but I could not stop myself. I turned, and there it was. This time, I really did jump out of bed, and I ran into my parents' room screaming. My mom told my dad that he needed to go check my room and make sure everything was okay. I found out later in my life that my mother believed in ghosts and the supernatural. My dad said fine, gave me an odd look, and made his way towards my room to appease my mother's request. It was no more than 2 minutes later, and my dad walked in and told my mom we needed to go stay at a hotel. Looking scared out of his mind, he contained himself, telling us he thinks maybe there is a gas leak causing me to see things. I knew that was not true. I was old enough to know that we did not use gas in that house, but I was just happy that we were getting out of there. After that night, I was never allowed to return to that house, not even to pack up my things. My dad made the excuse that it was unfit to visit or move back to due to a major gas leak. I did not question it, but it made no sense to me. We moved to the home where my parents still reside to this day. I eventually got answers to many questions. After my mom changed the subject, she left the room to do kitchen tasks. My dad immediately brought the topic back up. He told me there was no gas leak, we were not forced to move, and it was something much worse. The things that really happened that night still haunt him to this day. He said that when he walked into my room, he planned to sit on my bed for a few minutes and come back, telling me that it was all good. But when he entered my room, he realized that it was not good. It was evil, vengeful, and inhuman, and he knew that its purpose was clear. It wanted something, someone, me. There are still things that I know he has not told me. I think that there may have been dialogue, but he left it at that. They had our minister come anoint the home to chase out the evil and to cast out the demon, if that is what it was, from our lives. He even anointed the new home. It was like a mild exorcism of sorts. I did not want to tell my dad that, despite the efforts of the minister. Since that night, I cannot get away from something. I do not know how to describe what it is, but it's not good. It has very bad intentions and has impacted my life in a very negative way. I have never told this story before, not even to my 19-year-old ex-wife, but I think there may be others who hear this story who have that demon that is part of them, the feeling of ill intent at every turn. Once, when I was about 15, I sat down on the sofa and played my DS. My mom and my little sister, who was 5, were upstairs, and there was nobody else home. The house was really quiet, and I was completely into my game. Then I heard this quiet cry coming from upstairs that I could barely hear. I thought it would probably be my little sister, so I stopped and listened for a while, then it stopped. I carried on playing, and it started again. Again, I stopped and listened for a while, and it stopped again. So, beginning to get freaked out by this, I slowly walked up the stairs and called my sister's name. No response. I got that weird feeling that something wasn't right, which quickened my pace. I walked into my mom's room, and they were both asleep. My mom woke up and went to the bathroom, and I stood in the room completely confused. Then, out of the corner of my eye, the lamp flashed. I glanced over and realized that a teddy had fallen over onto the lamp, and it was smoking. I quickly yanked the teddy off the lamp, switched the lamp off, and turned on the main light. The teddy had a hole melted into its face, and the stuffing was showing. A few more minutes, and it would have caught fire. It was definitely one of the creepiest and luckiest moments of my life. My house sitting story. 2 months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes away from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than drive among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions. I was staying there for 3 nights, Monday wed. Monday evening was uneventful until about midnight. I was lying on the living room couch, watching Conan, with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I was completely freaked out, I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there was actually a faint blue light coming from above. I moved toward it and then understood where I was. I was in the ducking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads to the kitchen. Just enough moonlight apparently made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked all the way down the stairs, after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple things are important to the story. First, the basement. The house was very nice, actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I had only seen the basement once, when I first got the tour. It was totally unfinished and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were some boxes and the washer and dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there, and I had kind of forgotten it existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly and would sleepwalk sometimes, and it always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core, and still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia. But as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind, over and over, of me, asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs into total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day, I wasn't bothered one bit. But as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome with this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it in until it's as far as it can go. I test it out, trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God that I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I knew exactly where I was. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs, this night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and trying to open the basement door. Bending down and yanking out the wedge. And then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights, and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement staircase. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into two parts. To the right is a small area with the washer and dryer, and to the left is a big open area. Anyway, I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't noticed when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a ducking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work, though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up, so I tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. About how the basement is creepy, not to go down there, etc. They tried putting the litter boxes in the basement, and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down. He volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry, so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me because my brother has never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, ever since we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as when I'm walking to my car. I really don't want to stay there again, and I decide, duck it, I don't have to. So I go feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I would have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again, find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time, I slept through the night. That was night 3. On Thursday morning, I stopped at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down to turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it also doesn't seem scary anymore. So, what the hell? Let's see. I walk over to it, and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. Until I reach my hand toward the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through that hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain that something horrible would happen if I opened that door. It's hard to describe anything other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I met my brother for a happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking in the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what's behind the door, and he says I don't want to know. Joking at first, but then insisting. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother and has only bullshitted me about 1,000,000 times in my life. This was his explanation. The previous, and first, owners of the house had a teen daughter who used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart, they realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide that happened in the residence. He said, if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses in his tract. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people and figured it was a bargain, but they didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now here's what convinced me. I said, okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that the last morning I was there, I went over to the closet door and at this point, I see my brother's face change, and I continued, when I went to open it, the air felt like, and at the same instant, I say electricity and my brother says electric. At the same exact time. I saw his face, and I knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since.